welcome to episode number 81 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast, recorded August 23rd, 2020. My name is Hughes, and I'm the host of the show for tonight. I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, volunteer firefighter and station chief, and volunteer search and rescue technician and prepper. I've been preaching and living the prepper lifestyle to varying degrees for the last 6 years or so, and this was born out of necessity for the short and long-term survival of my family, which includes 3 young children.
Hi, my name is Ian. I live on Vancouver Island. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, sport shooter, and my farm's designated handyman.
I'm Alan. I'm a safety trainer, first responder, a security expert, and overall safety nerd.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris, and I love solar. I've been living off-grid now for many years, and have not had a power bill in at least a decade. Currently find myself in the sunny Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. I like to think myself as a freedom-loving, truth-seeking individual. I enjoy nothing more than setting off on 2-wheeled or 4-wheeled back-road adventures into the great outdoors with my 2 dogs. I've recently been living a minimalistic lifestyle, which ties in with my prepping, and my electronic engineering degree complements my day job, which is helping people actualize their individual preparedness goals utilizing solar technology. Whether it's energy independence, financial security, environmental reasons, or general peace of mind, solar power can provide it all.
And if you want to help support the show, keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air, buy a Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt at www.rapidsurvival.com. All proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
All right, if you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes and like us on Facebook and submit a review on iTunes. Also, we want your feedback, good or bad, if there's just a topic you want us to cover. You can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
And we have some illuminating content for you this episode. We're going to start off with some preparedness-related news, and next we'll let you know what we've been doing for preparedness since our last episode, and then we'll get into the main topic tonight, which is solar setups for emergencies. Alan, I'll let you go first.
I only put one article in here tonight. This is a article out of New York City. The mayor, Bill de Blasio, has decided that as part of his budget cuts to deal with the fact that he shut down his city for no damn good reason, he's laying off 400 of the New York City Fire Department EMS workers that saved lives just a few months ago and were the biggest heroes in the world. So just a reminder that help may or may not be coming, depending on where you are and when it's happening and where you are in the budget cycle.
For myself, just an article on the coronavirus death toll hitting 800,000 so far, and as nations are ramping up measures to try to contain the virus, you're seeing a resurgence in some countries like Spain, which were one of the hardest hit countries at the beginning of the pandemic. So you're seeing a resurgence there, and also that the U.S. is now the leading, I believe, in both deaths and number of cases. Although not quite surprising, it's just mind-boggling, really. So
they're number one for everything.
Ian or Chris, any?
Well, a little bit of preparedness news, perhaps. There's just a local article I read here this evening. I'll read a few of the details. A group of campers spent the night frantically looking for one of their friends after reportedly wandered off from a campsite in West Kelowna. So a 53-year-old went missing in the middle of the night, and his friends spent all night frantically looking for him. The search included ultimately the RCMP, the Central Okanagan Search and Rescue, RCMP Air Services, and the Police Dog Services. It says here that the man was spotted and roughly forced to train by RCMP Air Services helicopter and who was liaised with frontline officers, Central Okanagan Search and Rescue, Police Dog Services to safely assist the man out of the area. Thankfully, he only suffered minor injuries, and he received medical attention on site. So, just a reminder for people, something as simple as a whistle, cell phone, sat phone, ham radio, pocket emergency kit sometimes is very handy. I'm sure his night wasn't too enjoyable last night. It was pretty chilly here last night. And, one of the things they did say in the article, I just wanted to reach out there as well, is one of his friends had commented that he seemed depressed lately, and she's very worried about his state of mind. So I think we all have to be aware of our friend's state of mind, our own state of mind. I know in my own personal life, I've had depression twice in my life, and it was terrible. I don't wish that on anybody. So if that's something that you're struggling with, or you know somebody that is, you got to reach out for help. And so we don't know all the details of why he disappeared, but needless to say, he's back safely.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Chris. So what we've done lately for preps, I'm up first, so I actually haven't done a whole lot. I was on vacation the week prior to last, and then I had a short week this week. But I'm soon going to be gearing up for fall and winter preparedness, as hard as that is to say that summer's coming to a close. Here on the east coast of Canada, we have hurricane season to look forward to. Supposed to be a pretty active one, as we can see that there's currently 2 hurricanes barreling down in the Gulf of Mexico that are supposed to hit us simultaneously or one day from one another. So that's kind of unheard of, but that's 2020 for you. And also I'll be looking to do some maintenance and load testing on things like the generators, refreshing and replenishing get home bags. And I know this is about solar, but yes, I still have a generator. Eric or Ian, what have you done for preps lately? Sorry, not Eric, but Ian.
So for myself, I got the stitches out from that dog bite there, I guess about a week and a half ago, but we didn't have the show last week. So last Thursday, I got my hand back in operation, which was good. I shopped for the first aid supplies. I realized I was lacking after last week's inventory, after I went through the first aid kit and figured out what I didn't have in case of like bleeding and stuff like that. Let's see here. I installed the new coop shelves for storage, just to store more feed and supplies for the chickens. Worked on the free generator that I got given to me there a couple weeks ago. Got the engine running, but the generator didn't work, so it was a bit of a fail. Let's see here. Put together a couple more eaves troughs and water supply pipes for some rainwater collection. Did a couple range trips for maple seed, but funnily enough, one of the range trips turned into a first aid adventure because one of the guys on the firing line decided to scope himself with his high-powered rifle and started bleeding through his forehead. So that turned into a bit of a first aid situation there. Let's see here. What else did I do after that? So I did my maple seed course. Just finished that about 5 minutes here before we went online, and I got my rifleman patch. So I'll show you that once my camera comes back on. And let's see here. So that was good. It was a learning experience, to say the least. I did a couple range trips in prep for it, and it wasn't enough prep in the least. Let's see here. Reloaded some 9mm. Got the last small rifle primers that were left on the island because they're running into ammo shortages. And I think last thing I did was rotate out some of my gas for preparation for the fall shenanigans that I'm sure are about to ensue between elections and COVIDs and everything else. So yeah, it's been a busy couple weeks. So there it is. But I was happy I got the maple seed, this little tick in the box I wanted to take care of. So yeah, anyways, here it is. Let's see. We should be back here.
Yep, we see you now.
Oh, there it is. Hey.
Oh, it's awesome. Congratulations.
So, yeah, I was happy to get that.
Ian beat you this week, Hughes. So the first 3 pages, if anybody actually does read the show notes, the first 3 pages are mostly just Ian's preps for the week. I was also on vacation this week, which is obviously why we didn't have our show last week, just because everybody was out and about all at once. We spent our week up at a fairly remote cottage on a fairly remote lake where there was no cell service, no Wi-Fi. It was absolutely glorious. We spent most of that week planning our eventual retirement up in that area. We're gonna build a few cottages and have ourselves a little commune. It's gonna be a good time. So that's otherwise I've been struggling with technology and dealing with insurance based on the storm damage that we had here a few weeks back. So that's been my week. Not a whole lot of exciting things.
Awesome, thank you. Chris, was there anything you wanted to share as far as what you've done to stay prepared this week?
For sure, yeah. Recently I in the last year anyways, to give everybody full disclosure here, I've had a bit of taken a sabbatical from my work, and I've just been enjoying the great outdoors, and part of that is getting out, trying to test some of my limits in the backwoods. And to that extent, I've been cycling through some of my storage food, and I came across a couple of boxes of MREs that I bought back in 2010. They have a 5-year shelf life, and it's now 2020, and they are still edible. So I don't know what they do to you long term, but in the short term, they're fine. And also some dehydrated food. I've been cycling through that, and just kind of living, like I mentioned, I've been trying out the minimalist lifestyle thing here just for the last year, and it's eye-opening how little you need. but at the same time, how sometimes your preps can fall short. So the thing that I seem to forget to add to my preps was enough coffee for long-term storage. So
Awesome.
There's no such thing as enough coffee. Just
All right, so it's time to move on to the main topic of the show. So let's get started. I guess, Ian, did you want to get started with some of your questions, or? Or I'll just jump into it. So just looking, Chris, so some of your background, I know you mentioned electrical engineering and such, but what got you into solar?
Well, as a little youngster, I was really interested in electronics kits, and this is back in the day when Radio Shack still sold these sorts of things, and included in my kit was a little solar panel. I found it quite amazing that that could power little electronic doodads. I guess the first thing that I actually owned that was solar powered, it was quite practical, of course, is the solar powered calculator, and I still own that calculator about 30 years later here, and it still works. So I was convinced about solar power very early on, but as we jump forward now, after high school, like you mentioned, I went to university, briefly worked in the electronics engineering field, and then I went off into real estate for a decade. And after I was done the real estate career, I wanted to do something that was of interest and a passion to me. So I found my wife at the time. She mentioned, oh, there's some solar panels for sale here in an ad that she saw. And I just out of the blue went, looked at them, picked them up. And that's how I sort of got into solar. If you can imagine, that was an ad in a newspaper back in the day. Picked up some used solar panels and went from there. So.
And how long have you been in the business now, the solar business?
Yep. So I bought my own equipment 10 years ago, and so I kind of hopped in feet first and started business about 5 years ago. So it's been a wonderful thing, to work in an industry that you truly love, that you're passionate about, to wake up in the morning, you feel ethically aligned to it. You're not wrecking the environment. You're helping people all day long on many levels, whether it's preparedness, as I mentioned at the intro, whether it's economic, there's so many different ways that you can help people. So I always feel great about that.
And what's the rough makeup or setup of a solar system? Like if we're thinking the average person that may be listening to the show, you've got a home that's obviously probably connected to the grid at the moment. What does that system look like for the average person who'd be wanting to install this in their home?
Sure. Yeah. So there are many different types. As you mentioned, there's people that are connected to the grid, and these are probably the most recent iteration of solar technology. Maybe in the last 10 years, it's become popular, and it's what we call a grid tied or on grid tied, grid tied solar panels. And the beautiful thing with these systems is they are inexpensive. So the one huge thing that's come down in price over the last many years has been the solar panels themselves. If we go back 30 years, the solar panels were the very expensive component of the system. Now, with the pricing have dropped so much on those, it's the inexpensive component. The racking and the microinverters that we might use on a home system that I'll tell you about in a moment, those add up to more than the solar panels usually. But the system for a grid tie solar system for your house, if you're looking to reduce your energy bills or even eliminate your energy bill in its entirety, it's basically three major components. You got the solar panels themselves. Behind those solar panels, we use microinverters. So it's just a little box about the size of, I don't know, maybe it depends on which manufacturer you're using. But anyways, just a little box that sits behind the solar panels. And that converts from the direct current that comes from the solar panel, so the DC, and it inverts it to the same as your house. It inverts it to 240 volts AC. So there's that component, and the last component is racking, so the connecting equipment to your roof. Yeah.
So question for you, when we were talking about the microinverters that are on each one of the panels, is that more efficient than having one big inverter? Is there a reason why it's being done like that?
Yeah, you bet. So, I mean, there's many different technologies. The one I mentioned is just one of them, microinverters. There's 2 or 3 different types of technologies. The other one you're alluding to there is a string inverter. So traditionally, before microinverters came to the market, what you would do is if you had 10 panels on your roof, you might depending on the inverter. You would attach several of those or all of those into a string and put that into the inverter, a central inverter, as you mentioned. There are drawbacks with that. As far as efficiency goes, it's debatable. But the problem with the string inverters, if you have any shading at all, even if you have only a portion of one panel in that string that gets obstructed, say by a shadow from a tree that passes through the course of the day, that will cut out the entirety of the solar string. So what happened there is they realized the problem with that. So they came up with this microinverter technology. And what happens with that is every single solar panel operates individually. And so if you've got 10 panels on your roof, again, same example, and you've got microinverters behind each one, as the shadow passes over individual panels, the power output from those will drop out. But the great news is that the rest of them will stay on. So it just depends on the site. Microinverters are typically a little bit more expensive. There's pros and cons to both. There's lots of places where a string inverter would be advantageous for sure.
Right. I'm just thinking now, as, folks that are listening to this podcast, preparedness minus folks, if you have 10 microinverters and one fails, you still have 9 panels producing power essentially, right?
Exactly.
As opposed to if your string inverter fails, you have no power being generated whatsoever. Well, the power is being generated, it's just not being inverted to what your house needs, right? So
exactly. So we often look at that from a design point of view and how many points of failure there are. And with a single point of failure in an inverter technology, centralized inverter technology, that is one of the drawbacks, yes.
So in this system, you didn't mention a battery. So basically, all of your savings would be before the panel, if I'm not mistaken, and then any excess power would go back into the grid. At which point, if I'm not mistaken, you would get a credit from your utility, or you would build a credit with your utility, right? And then when you're not producing solar, so let's say in the evenings or overnight, all that kind of stuff, you'd be pulling from the grid and hopefully chewing up that credit to where you have a net zero utility bill, right? That's the...
Yeah, precisely. Got it. They're pretty much exactly right.
Okay.
What else can I add to that? It all depends on your local utility. So each utility in each province and each jurisdiction has different rules and regulations. But where we're at here in BC, BC Hydro has a beautiful service, is a net metering connection agreement, as well as Fortis BC. And just like you said, basically all spring, summer, fall, your solar panels are putting in a lot more power than you're using. So you are basically turning your power meter backwards. If you have an old analog one, it will literally turn backwards. If you've got a new one, a smart meter will just read how much outflows or how much you're pushing into the grid all day long. And like you mentioned, nighttime comes, you draw that power back from the grid. So it is a batteryless system, and that is what makes it so cost efficient these days, is you don't have to buy expensive batteries for that particular system. One drawback with it, of course, is that it can be a beautiful sunny day. If the power grid goes out, for safety, your solar system will shut down as well. So you can have a big, fancy, expensive solar system on your roof and have no power in your house. So if battery backup is something that you need, it certainly can be put in there as well. But you'll typically find in our areas, the grid is up most of the time, 99.9% uptime or more.
So I heard that as well, that's right. So if the utility power is shut off for some reason, even though you're generating solar, you won't have power. And then why is that? Is there something needed? Is there utility power needed to power an inverter or power a controller?
Yeah, precisely. So these are built-in safety features. The technical name is called anti-islanding, and it's required by law, both in Canada, United States, and most places. And what we're trying to prevent is that if the electrical grid did go down, and there's linemen down the street working on your repair, and you're powering the grid, that won't be too good. So these grid-tied solar systems, they are grid dependent. And so you do have to provide them with an input signal so that they will create their own power. And most of these technologies, if they cut out within 1 or 2 milliseconds typically. So if the grid goes down, they shut off right away.
I guess I understand now. It's the same thing as having like an interlock if you're using a generator. So if your power is out, you have an interlock, so you're not backfeeding the grid and potentially harming linemen that are working. Okay, that makes sense. So then what would be the advantage of having a battery? Is it to remove the peaks and valleys, or is it...
It can be multifunctional. I guess it depends on the purpose of the customer. Traditionally speaking, batteries have always been used for battery backup. So, for example, the system that I bought 10 years ago, they still sell the same system today, and it's a little bit special. It has a battery, of course, and it's what they call an on-grid, an off-grid, or a hybrid inverter. So this is kind of like a third area of solar technology, and all that means is basically my system is connected behind or into my electrical panel behind the meter, and if the power grid ever drops out, it has an automatic transfer switch, just like you mentioned for your generator, but it automatically switches within 8 milliseconds on that one. And so your lights barely even flicker, and you're running on battery power, and you don't even know that the power is out. Once the power comes back on, it automatically transfers back to grid power, and your batteries recharge either with a solar or with the grid. Now, that's traditionally what power or battery backup's been used for, is backup power. But as you mentioned, it can be used for many things these days. These advanced inverters that I'm talking about, the hybrid inverters, they have all sorts of technology that is, if you have a time of day usage in the place that you live where you're charged an exorbitant rate, maybe in the peak hours, you can use your battery to clip the amount of power that you're drawing from grids during certain times. So time of use is the fancy name for it. But you can totally program these things to, whatever you want. If you wanted to do maximum power export during the day, you can do that. You can even program them to not export any power and just use all that power internally on your own house. So you can crank up the air conditioning and whatever the heck you like with all your surplus power during the day and not export any of that to the grid, because some areas don't let you export. For whatever reason, different reasons sometimes. And so you can still have solar, you can still have the power battery backup, and all the advantages of solar. It's just that you don't necessarily have to export to the grid. And if they ever do allow it one day, with a little change in the software setting, you're now exporting power.
Okay.
Is it possible to put in a kind of a reverse transfer switch, I guess? So when we've got a backup generator, you obviously have an automatic transfer that disconnects from the meter and allows the generator to run. Could you do the same thing going backwards so that your solar would still run if it was net metered?
Let's see. So net metered, yeah, you certainly can, at least with the hybrid systems. So with the microinverters, definitely not. But if we're talking about integrating a generator into a hybrid system like the one I'm talking about, absolutely. The beautiful thing with that is it's all seamless. If you have just a little box that you connect to the system called an automatic gen start, anytime that those batteries are getting below a preset value of depletion, you've used your batteries, they're starting to get on the low side, that generator will automatically kick on, and so using, again, another transfer switch that's built into the hybrid inverter. And it's all automatic, so you don't have to do anything, as long as you don't have a pull start generator, that is, of course. But yeah, so the beautiful thing is that generator will come on, it'll run at whatever max power that you have it set for. So say if you have a 5,000 watt generator, if you're running it close to that power, you draw that much power off it, charge those batteries back up really quickly within, say, an hour or two, get them back to 80-90% full, and then you can shut that generator off. And what happens is not only do you have a long-term backup power, both in battery form, you also have it in your generator in the form of fuel, and the solar. I mean, when the daylight finally comes around, the solar starts charging the system. So one of the other advantages, just to mention while we're on this, is that essentially when you have a generator connected to a system like that, you're what we call a generator run reduction. So some people will buy one of these fancy inverters that I'm talking about, because right now all they have is they're running on running on generator all day long. And they call me up, they say, what can we do to get the generator run down? And by putting in a battery bank and inverter charger, that's what happens. Essentially your generator comes on for an hour or two, charges up those batteries, and then shuts off. And you get through the rest of your evening on stored battery power.
Okay. And is it also reasonable? Is there such a thing as a hybrid system where I'm using some of my solar panels to generate my 240 volt and convert it from DC to AC, as well as have just a DC only system and say convert my lighting to like LED low voltage. Is that also reasonable? Is that possible?
That's a very advanced question. Excellent to hear. You've been doing your homework. Absolutely. So maybe for certain reasons you'd want a conjunction of microinverters along with this type of hybrid system that I'm talking about. Quite often those hybrid systems do use DC for the panels, DC strings, and then they're through a charge controller, they charge the batteries. So you can have both AC and DC systems mixed together. And the fancy term for us in our industry is called the AC coupling or DC coupling. So it's you can couple your AC microinverter portion of your solar array to the grid directly if you like, or if you want, we can put it behind the battery, behind the inverter. And the beautiful thing with that is that if the power cuts out, if the grid goes out, the hybrid inverter is still making its signal. And so therefore, your microinverter panels can still keep running and producing for you in a grid down situation. And so that is one way to make that happen. The advantage of that is your whole solar array is working for you. The only thing, of course, you have to be careful of is... sorry, I got distracted with a loud vehicle going by. The only thing you have to be careful of is you don't want to pump in too much AC behind your inverter. You have to get that programming just right, or size it just right, because if you push in too much AC behind your hybrid inverter, sparks will fly. So.
Okay.
Let's talk about the price of solar. So I know, just for example, I got a quote shortly after I bought my home here in 2011, I think, and the cost was so prohibitive that even the installer said, I don't think I would pursue this system at this time, because the amount of time your ROI is going to be more than the lifespan of the system. So although I would have reduced my power bill and all that, they basically said, you're going to be paying this for, like if you opt for payments at 0% interest, you're basically going to be paying for this for 20 years, whereas the system has a lifespan of 15 years. Fast forward to 2020, looking at this now, where the systems are about $11,000, so you basically came down from about $30,000 to $11,000. Is it something that the price is going to keep dropping? Is now the right time to get into solar, or is it going to be cut in half again in 2 years? Right.
Right. Excellent question. So many people wait on that. They hear the stories of 30,000 to 10,000 and they say, holy cow, if I wait 10 more years, I'll get it for practically nothing. I think we've seen, unfortunately, I'd have to dig for it a little bit. It's beside me, but there's a graph that shows a decrease in solar panels and in the price of silicon, and it's exponential. It's went down, 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 down. And we're right near the very bottom of that. So as far as the price of silicon, the price of solar panels, it's the most inexpensive component of the system right now. So I don't foresee any huge price decreases. 10 years ago, absolutely, it was expensive. I bit the bullet and spent $30,000 on my solar system, and everybody looked at me and they said, are you crazy? And I said, well, how old are you, Dad? And he said, well, I'm 70. And I said, how many years have you been paying a power bill? And he said, started thinking about that. 50 years. And how much you pay a year, Dad? And well, $4,000 a year, right? You do the math on that. Who's crazy? Not having a power bill is proof in the pudding that my investment 10 years ago paid itself off for me. Now, part of that is the guilty pleasure of being able to go to my off-grid location, push a button, and everything comes alive. So, what can I say? I wanted to answer your question there a little bit more. I'm just going to go through the show notes, but go ahead with your next one. The price of the solar system,
Yeah, so just a comment here from the notes. Tracy in the notes said another issue we have with string is if we get snow on one, we suffer with power. And I think that comes back to what you mentioned, that if with the string system, if one panel's down, the whole string's not producing, right? So not only with shadows, but with snow as well. And with a lot of us here living in North America, snow is a reality we have to deal with, right? So
it sure is. And I think, so it depends if the customer is living off-grid or on-grid. If we're talking about a grid tie solar system that's very, very popular these days, mostly because everybody can do it. If you're connected to the grid, which most people are, you're pretty much eligible. In those types of systems, we don't worry about it so much. Snow, believe it or not. And the reason why is because we size the system for annual consumption. So when a customer calls me up and they say, we want a solar, I say, okay, great. The first thing you can do before I show up to your home would be to pull up all your power bills. And so they do that for me, and they can do it over the internet. And we figure out what their consumption is on an annual basis. And let's just say that that's 20,000 or 30,000 kilowatt hours a year. Then we can reverse and do the math and figure out the size of the solar system that we need according to where they live. And that takes into account how much sunlight hours, how much snow there is in the winter. It basically it uses all the weather data, the historical weather data and sunlight data and all sorts of things from different locations. And it very accurately predicts. So when it comes to snow on solar panels on a grid tie system, we don't worry about it because we size the system so that in the spring, the summer, and the fall, when we don't have snow, it puts in enough energy to offload our amount that we're using. Now, the same question and applying that to an off-grid system, absolutely. Snow, anything, shadows even, anything that obstructs the sunlight from getting to your panels is a major problem. And the reason, of course, the difference here is because you require those panels to give you energy every single day when you're living off-grid. And so it is vital. So even though you mentioned earlier and people mentioned that they have a generator, that's a good thing, because on an off-grid system, a generator is a vital component of an off-grid system to recharge those batteries every once in a while. So absolutely. Sometimes we worry about snow on panels, sometimes we don't. Yeah, it just depends on the situation for sure. But it is it totally stops the power output from solar. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that when you speak to a customer, that you basically have to look at the consumption that they've had, like the historical consumption, because at least from what my understanding is here on the East Coast, I'm in Nova Scotia, is that they will size the utility basically mandates that the system be sized to your consumption history, but you can also go 20% higher than that, I believe. So to let you, like if we go back and say, your consumption is 10,000 kilowatt hours, they'll let you do 12,000 kilowatt, or a system capable of doing 12,000 kilowatt hours. And, that's probably different by jurisdiction, I guess, or?
Yep, that's exactly right. Okay. Our particular jurisdiction says 100% system sizing. So what you consume is what you can produce. I have had success with getting exceptions from the power company in a case maybe that a customer, in one of our cases, was expecting to get their new electric car to be arriving soon. And so we oversized the system and got permission for that, and they agreed that that's reasonable. So I did what you were mentioning earlier came back to me regarding the price of solar. And, one of the questions I often get, and I think it came out of your mouth as well, was return on investment. And so many people ask that. What's the return? How fast does it pay back? And I often like to, ask people, what's the return on investment on your power bill? Right now.
There's no return on investment.
Thank you. Yeah,
there's absolutely none. Yeah,
you're a lot quicker than most people. A lot of people take a lot longer to figure that one out. But there is no return on investment. So anything that you get any return on investment is much better than what you're doing right now. And then, of course, the actual numbers depend on several factors. It depends primarily, lots of times, on the price of power in your area. It's a huge one that it changes in every location. It also sometimes requires a crystal ball. I mean, what's the power prices expected to do in your area in the future? And some people have different areas, jurisdictions have seen skyrocketing electrical prices that freak me out. And so, you have to know that. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is, well, which solar installer or solar company did you go with? Because some will charge, we'll say $10,000 for a system, and someone might charge $15,000 for the exact same system. And if you like the guy that showed up, and maybe you like the fellow that pitched you the $15,000 system, you just maybe liked him better for whatever reason, and you overpaid, then your payback is going to take significantly longer as well. So there's several different factors that come into it, but one way or the other, typically my customers out here, it depends on which system they're with, because there's two systems where we live here in Kelowna. There's BC Hydro and Fortis BC. And they have different rates. So the return on investment from one side of the lake to the other can vary by about 2 or 3 years just because of that differentiation.
Okay, so we could figure out, the return on investment just by looking at, how much you're saving versus how much you're paying for the whole system. But what is the typical lifespan of, I guess, a panel would be my concern, but also the system in general. So understanding that there's microcontrollers on each one of the panels, they can fail, they need to be replaced. But the panels themselves, is it something that you're looking at 10 years, 15 years, 20 years?
Yeah. So if we think back for a moment, solar panels are space age technology, and that's kind of a cliche saying these days. But if you think about some of the original solar satellites that went up there, they're all run on solar. And even to this day, the majority of things, including the International Space Station, are all run on solar. And what they're finding is that most of these panels that were sent up 50, 60 years ago are still operating. So what there is when it comes to solar panels, the easiest answer is the following. Most solar panels have a 25-year warranty, both on workmanship, but more importantly on power output. We can talk about that more in a moment. Also, depends on the company. A lot of centralized string inverters that we talked about earlier, some of those have 10-year warranties, extendable to 20 or 25. And same with the microinverters. Most of them are available with 25-year warranties. So from a customer point of view, absolutely, what can you buy these days that have warranties? And so that, that's amazing. And then the other thing is with solar panels, there's when we talked about power output warranty, there's a known degradation rate of silicon when it sits out in the sun. And it's between 0.25% and 0.5% per year. So if we just go with the higher number of those two, the 0.5%, when you do the math on that, basically after 10 years of sitting out in the sun working for you, putting power back into the grid, your power output might go down by a certain number of percent, 5% in this example. After 20 years, the power output from those panels would be down 10%. And so the power output warranties for most manufacturers on the low side they'll guarantee an 80% output after 25 years. And some of the higher brand panels will actually go with almost half of that degradation rate. So to 90% power output after 20 or 25 years. So the thing is they don't just stop working. I mean, it's a solid state technology. There's no moving parts inside of them. You don't even have to clean them most times unless you lived in a dusty location, because when it rains, it does the work for you. And it's certainly not worth, for grid-tie solar systems, you don't want to be climbing under your roof and brushing the snow off them. It's just not worth it. There's barely any sun in the wintertime anyways. For off-grid systems, of course, sometimes you have to do that. So.
That's really good. Thank you for that answer, because I that was my concern, is that how long is the panel going to last? And at first, when I first got my estimate for $30,000, am I paying for something for 20 years with a panel that's going to last 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So.
Oh, sorry guys, I just got a bit of a left mic here, but the lifespan is a lot longer than I expected. But now, has there been any unexpected downsides for the solar systems at all that surprised you, Chris?
I haven't found one yet. No, not really. I'm still trying to find one. I think the worst things that I could ever find bad news about solar systems was an article that I read years and years ago. I kind of cringe to even mention it, but if you want my honest answer, was somebody had mentioned in an article that some manufacturers use a bad chemical in the production process. So whether they still use that chemical or not, I'm not too sure, but that's what the worst things I think I've ever heard of solar panels is, maybe that, but that's a trivial little thing. Probably the worst things with solar panels would be not having any.
And I think too on the panels, what I was thinking is that if I bought this system now in 10 years, if the panels get twice as efficient as they are from when I bought my system, does that mean I have to replace them? And the answer is probably no, because to your point, if we're looking at a 10% degradation, let's say over the course of 20 years, my consumption needs probably haven't changed all that much. So the only way I would have to replace the panels is if I wanted to get more efficient, smaller panels, or more efficient and less panels, meaning I didn't want as many on my roof. but there's probably not a huge cost advantage to that other than aesthetics, I guess, right? So
Yeah, that's right. The other reason that a person might decide to do that after 10 years only, even though their panels are perfectly functional and fine, would be maybe their power requirements went up. Maybe they got a car that they didn't have, or a pool, or some other energy-intensive something in their house. And the other thing is that maybe they didn't have enough roof space originally. So as the power density on the panel goes up, that same square footage, if they can get double or the amount of power density out of their roof, it might make sense at some point. And the beautiful thing with these panels, because they just go and go and go for 25, 35, 45, 50 years, barring a huge catastrophe of some sort, tree coming down on your house, they just keep working and working. So it's a great thing.
And you could probably add on to the system as well. You don't necessarily need to replace existing panels in order to make the system, increase the capacity of the system. You could just keep adding panels if you needed to increase the capacity, right? So
exactly. So one of the beautiful things with the microinverters, as we were talking about earlier, is that your system is completely scalable. So sometimes people, they say, hey, what's it cost per solar system? And I always like to give them an answer that's honest and attractive, and that's, it can be anything that you like. How much do you have to invest? It can be $3,000 if you like, and because we can just add more panels with that, it's a scalable. Whereas with string inverter technology, you can't easily add and subtract panels necessarily.
So Tracy here in the comments here on Facebook has a question and says, so because we brush off our panels daily in the winter, are we at risk to lose power output quicker or faster because we are touching the panels?
Nope, I think absolutely. When you're living off grid, you've got to get those panels clean. Quite often, maybe I can show some images that I have here later, or maybe I'll show them right now. So this is an example of something that we have. We'll see if we can get it in focus. Yep. So these are shipping containers, and we call these containerized energy units. And what you're seeing there is sort of the almost the wintertime position on the solar panels. And my point being that wintertime, if you can get those panels almost vertical, that would be excellent. So sometimes the angle on your mounting system is vital. And in this one here, you can see that we got the other one tilted back. It's more of a summer position. You can sit under there for shade. So just to answer your question, no, it is vital in the wintertime. If you're living off grid, it is so powerful to have your panels set up on some sort of mount that can be rotated and to almost a vertical. Of course, depends where you live in Canada, but to get the snow so that it doesn't stick on there, it melts off very quickly once the sun comes out.
Got it. Any safety hazards that you need to, I guess, be concerned about when it comes to solar?
Yeah, well, of course, depends which technology you're using. Microinverters, they're relatively safe. String inverters, things can get exciting very quickly. The reason why is the DC voltage, say a panel puts out 30 volts, and you connect another one to it, and you connect 10 in a row. At the output of those two connections, a positive and negative, you're going to have 300 volts DC. And this is like life-threatening. And part of the reason why is a DC spark. If you ever get an arc going between two wires, it does not self-extinguish like AC does, because every 1/60th of a second, an AC voltage its voltage will go to zero as it vibrates back and forth between positive and negative. And needless to say, that doesn't happen with string inverters. So you kind of really got to be careful. For someone that's a do-it-yourselfer, there's many things that you can do with solar, whether we're talking off-grid or grid tie systems. That's one of the things that we sort of specialized in, was helping our customers that are do-it-yourselfers, equipping them with the knowledge, all the information they need, from videos to checklists, so that they can do an install themselves. So you mentioned safety. It can be done safely, absolutely. So that's one of the things I encourage my customers, if they're handy and they want to have the sense of satisfaction, literally empower themselves. I've had several customers that they climb onto their own roof, they bolt down all the equipment, they connect it up. And even though they're not electricians, they don't have to be here because they aren't doing any electrical connections on the roof. And again, this comes back to safety. So with the microinverters, you have a particular solar panel, you plug those ends directly into the microinverter, and it does not start creating 240 volts right away, and that's simply because it does need the grid to be present. So a person can literally get onto the roof of their home, install their whole solar system in our jurisdiction anyways. In some different provinces, they have different rules, but they do a lot of the work themselves and then have the qualified electrician come out. They get the permit, they do the final connections on it, interconnect it directly to your power system in your home, and you go on your way. Now, the beautiful thing with doing that is that goes right back to your return on investment. So if you can save maybe $2,500 to $3,000, depends on the size of the system, but if you can save thousands of dollars on your install, your return on investment you knocked off 2, 3, 4 years, depending on system size, of course. Yeah.
Two questions, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
One, how portable are these panels? So I'm thinking about my house. I'm having my roof replaced. I'm putting 50-year shingles on. If I'm 10 years into my roof and I'm going to need to replace my shingles in another 10 or 15 years, what's the process involved in actually like removing those to do the roof and then replacing them? Is it complicated? Is it expensive? Is it what?
No problem. So just if I want to make sure I understand your question correctly, you mentioned a 50-year shingle, but you'd also mentioned 10 years into what sounded like a 20-year shingle. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm just thinking. I'm thinking about my roof. So
you're
on my roof,
there.
I'm putting on 50-year shingles. If and I would put this on a brand new. Be putting this on a brand new roof if I did it on my house. If I'm the average homeowner, I've got 10. I put my roof on 10 years ago. Put the shingles on 10 years ago. I've got maybe 10 or 15 years out there before I have to replace the roof again or replace the shingles again. What's my, like, is it a big deal to take those off and put them back on after?
Sure. Sorry, I just wanted to understand, got me a little confused with the 50-year/20-year. So, there's a couple of schools of thought on that. Lots of times it's beautiful to start with a fresh new surface, strip up everything and put down your equipment. But for the person in that situation, my answer would be the following. One of the ways to go about it, what you have to understand is once you put solar panels on your roof, those shingles, they are not exposed to most of the elements anymore. They don't see the rain, they don't see the sun, which is a real hard one on them. They don't see the hail. And so when you think you might have 10 years left in those shingles, if you left them exposed, you might find you got 15 or 20 years left in those shingles that are underneath the solar panels.
Right.
So we have done jobs where a person is in that situation where they're 10 years into a 20-year product, and we've just basically outfitted the whole entire roof with solar, so there wasn't a lot of setbacks along the edges, and that allowed them to just go over it, and they probably won't have any problems whatsoever. Now, if a person did install solar and time comes to change the roof for whatever reason, it's not hard at all, actually. There's everything is, it's just the time and labor, mostly. When it comes to materials, there's a fancy word, it's called the flashing that we use to keep the water tank connection on your roof. That would be the only part that would have to be replaced with new ones because those are sealed in place. But besides that, the solar panels, the mounts, the racking, the inverters, everything just is stripped off the roof. Roofers do their job. You put the equipment back on just like you had it, and with the exception of ordering in some new flashings and sealant, and away you go. So from a do-it-yourselfer point of view, it's not a problem. If you're paying somebody to do it, though, just be aware that they'll charge the hourly rate of whatever that is, and it can add up. So, depending on the size of your system, of course.
Okay. And my second question, I read briefly about the Tesla shingles. So they're shingles themselves that are solar panels. I'm guessing they're still fairly new technology because they're not in wide use. What's the story with those?
Yeah, well, it depends if you're talking about the announcement 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe the a little bit newer one. Do you know which release it was?
I think it was about, I don't know, it was within the last year, I think, was the article I was reading, but I don't have it up to refresh it.
Well, I'll tell you what I do know. Of course, most everything with Tesla and Elon Musk is exciting and promoted, and maybe sometimes over promoted. In our industry, we deal with things that we can get our hands on from the manufacturers, from the distributors, and what's mass produced right now. So while I'm excited about integrated solar panels like the ones that I saw in his news release years and years ago that still have not come to market, I might mention. So we kind of have to sometimes differentiate the hype between reality and, if you're interested in those particular panels that he showed off 4 years ago, you might never see them. But when they do come out, gosh only knows how long that will be. It all comes down to aesthetics. And so I think what you'll find these days is a lot of the panel manufacturers are finally making all black panels. So modules that are all black, they go on your roof, the frames are black, the silicon is black, and the backer sheet is black. And those look very fancy. In some cases, I might even say sexy on some homes if they're put in there correct. And so, there's pros and cons to both. I could list off a whole bunch of cons in the Tesla ones, but it comes down to me what's available today, what's cost efficient, and the few places that they have put in those panels, kind of on a prototype basis, I don't think it was very cost effective at all. And then the other problem with that is, from what I understand, the way that they're all integrated, there's no just changing out one panel if there's ever an issue. And I could go on and on, but
okay. So they're just not really a thing, and wouldn't be something.
They're not available. Yeah, they're not available right now. And when they are, I understand that they're going to go through the Tesla vertical integration product line. So maybe just like the Tesla doesn't have they don't have distributors of their cars. They sell their own cars through their own distributor network. You're going to find that just the same way they've done with the Tesla Powerwall, is they set up their own network and buy through them. So if you want to buy the brand, absolutely, wait around. But for everybody that's not maybe caught up in the hype, you can pick up something today, and it'll be, by the time that the Tesla panels come out, your solar system will probably be paid off.
Right.
It's interesting, Chris, that you mentioned the aesthetics of it, because I remember when I was looking at the system like 10 years ago, because my house is not south-facing, so I'm basically east-west, they would have had to install some additional racking on the roof in order to get the panels to be south-facing. And aesthetics is something we thought about, and we thought, we just bought this nice, beautiful home, and we don't really want to break up the lines and hide the roof and all that kind of stuff with solar. And I think it's a lot more accepted today, not that it wasn't 10 years ago, but it's not something you saw. It wasn't commonplace 10 years ago, and I can tell you right now that it definitely isn't commonplace here now. I mean, I could drive and drive by 100 homes before I see one that has a solar setup on it, right? But I think I would be much more accepting of it now in my home than I would be 10 years ago when I just bought a brand new home. So
yeah, so let's talk about that. I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because there's so many things that we can talk about and how things have changed in the industry. So let's go back 10 years, 20 years. Silicon, the solar panels themselves were very expensive. And as most people probably know, you get the most output from a solar power when you face it south. So as you mentioned, I've seen some pretty crazy east-west roofed homes that have some pretty crazy setups trying to get those silicon panels to face south. And some of them are downright dangerous. If you get a windstorm come through, I wouldn't want to be the insurance company for that house. And so that's another thing that's changed in the industry is, and I'll show you some pictures here right now. I had a customer, one of my do-it-yourself customers, they have an east-west facing roof, and this is a job they did all by themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that is east and west facing. And what you'll find is if you get into some of these calculators on the internet, that in our area, and probably most areas, you only lose about between 15 and 18 to 20% on each side versus a south-facing roof. So for this customer, of course, they didn't want a crazy setup on the roof. These were the ones that were getting the electric car in the future. They just decided to deck out their roof and in an east-west configuration. And even with that, they have zero power bill. So these days.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, because I know and part of the setup that they were proposing for me, and this is again individual to my experience, but they were even proposing putting racks on the side of the house in order to get those panels to be south facing. So I was going to have stuff hanging off the side of my house, and we get pretty crazy windstorms and hurricanes, and I figured that's just going to rip off the side of the house and take the siding with it. And
and things like that, as crazy as that might sound today, that was common practice 10, 15 years ago to do things like that because it was so important to face them south because that panel was so darn expensive. But like I said, now, point,
like you said, 15 to 18%. Really, you just build it into the sizing of the system, I guess. If you know that you're going to lose up to 18%, you add an additional two panels and you gain that 18% back. It's not that big of a deal anymore.
Precisely, yeah. So part of the analysis that we do off the beginning with any customer is exactly that. So looking at the roof orientation, the roof of the angle, or the angle of the roof, all sorts of different factors that come into play That particular one, I'll see if I've got a photo that shows it, but they had the 2 trees in their backyard, and I don't have a good photo that shows it, but I used, sometimes when we come upon a site that has any sort of shading, we use a tool called the shade analysis tool. And it's just a device. There's electronic ones as well as analog ones. I've got the old-fashioned analog one that works no batteries. And we set that up on the roof, and we determined that there's a fair amount of afternoon shading from those trees. And I mentioned that to them. This is part of, if you leave those trees in place, we're just going to have to add a few more solar panels. And one of the trees was actually diseased, I believe. And so they said, we'll take out one of them. And then we said, oh, great. And then, so right now, to this day, it's pretty neat because you can, especially with microinverters, you can watch every 5 minutes, the system updates its information to the web, up to the cloud. And it says, here's the power output. And it tells me the power output from every single panel. And so I can look at that to their house at any given time, and I can see exactly in the afternoons and the evenings where they shade from the one remaining tree will actually block out certain panels on the west side of their home, and the rest of them keep on putting full output. So it really is a neat little thing that happens.
That's awesome. Alan, any other questions for Chris?
That has answered all the questions I've had currently, and so many more. A lot of things to think about. We were talking about solar both for our current property and future properties, and so I was excited to kind of get into this a little bit more, and there's certainly a lot to consider. So I guess the last question I have is about structure. Like, do I need, if I'm planning a new building, is there anything I should be doing to my roof, like to the construction of my roof, to make it more suitable to support solar panels?
Yeah, so excellent question. Most new homes, the new truss manufacturers have realized that a lot of homes are be putting solar on their roof. So most trusses these days have adapted the plates on them, a little bit longer teeth on them. So most trusses these days are pre-qualified essentially for solar. It's certainly something you want to double check with your engineer, your architect. The one thing I would say, though, most important, isn't so much about structure, but it's the layout of your roof. So most homes these days have multifaceted, 10, 12 different surfaces on the roof, whereas the house that I showed you, the old-fashioned house from the 1960s, has only 2 surfaces, an east and a west in that particular scenario. So if you have a choice to design your roof with the minimum number of surfaces, make it one continuous surface, that makes it good for solar. Also, if you pay attention sometimes to your venting and different things that come out of your roof, if you can pick where some of those go, it makes for a nicer looking solar install. So.
It's funny you mentioned that, Chris, because I think that's one of the reasons why they were going to hang panels off the side of my roof, is because I have 9 different surfaces on my roof.
Yes.
And none of them are very big in size. I mean, you could probably fit 3 or 4 panels on each one of them, but it was just going to be a mess, right?
Yeah. And, it sounds like you made the right choice for many reasons years ago not to buy at that time. Of course, they were just starting to come out with microinverters 10 years ago. I believe Enphase was one of the first companies that came out with those. And for the surface that you describe of your house, you definitely need microinverters, because every time you have a panel facing a different direction, it's outputting different than the rest. And when it comes to string inverters, you really want all those panels receiving the same amount of light for optimum output. These days, this is where microinverter takes the cake.
And I think that's why the contractor was trying to talk me out of the system. He gave me a quote and he said, I'd be happy to do it. I'll be happy to take your money, but he's like, this is probably not the right time. And I'm kind of happy I did, but now you've rekindled my interest in it. I'm really thinking about it. So thank you for that. We're almost at time, so I'm just going to go ahead with the podcast challenge. So listen, try building a small scale system to power your small devices via a car battery, for example. And I know when Chris mentioned at the beginning of the show that he got interested in solar by, the little solar panel that comes in a kit. I remember doing that as a kid as well. I got like this little engineering kit with a little 4 4-notch solar panel, and we were powering a little DC motor with a fan on it, and you could stop it with your finger, so it wasn't very powerful. But to me, that was just amazing that something was working, without a battery, without being connected to the grid. So that's awesome. So, and also you can contact Chris for a free 30-minute one-on-one solar consultation, big or small. He can help you with it. And I believe, Chris, if not mistaken, you can be reached at 250-575-9221. Is that
you
correct?
got her. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, got her. If I could just add a couple little things here. You mentioned trying to build a small-scale solar power system from a car battery. Well, I've been out camping for the last few weeks, and one of the things that I did was try to get away from society and get off the grid, but I still want to have a few electronic devices to be charged. And this here is as small sometimes as they can get. So this is like a 10-watt solar panel, and it's very tiny, and it's robust. No aluminum frame on this one, and this only outputs about 10 watts. So it's kind of designed to be a trickle charger for your car. If you're leaving it alone, or your RV, you really want to keep those batteries trickle charged. That's a perfect use for something like that. And I've been very impressed. I connected that up to a motorcycle battery and charged all my devices for several weeks in the middle of nowhere. So it can be as simple as something that small. And if you got one more minute, I got to tell you a story what sold me on solar. The solar panels that my wife mentioned, wife at the time, I should clarify, mentioned that I bought out of the newspaper. I took them out to a remote piece of land, and my son and I were there, and I had left the radio on in the truck. And sure enough, he went to leave at the end of the day, and click, 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 when he tried the starter. The truck would not start. I was in this remote location, nobody around, kind of like scratching my head, and the daylight was running out, right? But at the time, I didn't even realize that you needed a charge controller, if you can imagine that in my naivety. But so I took those particular panels and I wired them directly to my car battery, and I'm not suggesting this by any stretch, but in that particular situation, I gave it about 15 or 20 minutes. It was cumulus clouds, many clouds going overhead that day, but when the sun did peek through the clouds, it was charging. And I'll tell you, in 20 or 30 minutes later, when that truck started up, it sold me on those panels that I had just bought. So
saved you.
It really saved me that particular day from walking out and getting a boost from somebody. So yeah, it's amazing how that works sometimes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. Just some upcoming events. So we've got TechCom Canada 2020, which has been delayed until April 23rd to 25th, 2021. You can see details for the show or the ticket in the show notes. As well, attend the Maple Seed event. So mapleseedraffleman.com. Shout outs. Chris, thank you very much for being on the show. Solar has been one of those things that we've wanted to talk about. Solar is one of those things that's integral to preparedness and what we do as people that want to not have to rely on the grid and not have to always be relying on things like generators because they run out of fuel, which is a downside, and solar does not run out. So thank you for being on the show, and thank you for your time as well.
No problem. Yeah. So for a shout out, I'm not sure if this is the right place to do it or not, but sometimes in these trying times, I love the humor. And I saw a video that made me laugh the other day. Apparently it made 4.2 million other people laugh as well, so I'll mention it. But it's a video, it's called What It's Like to Believe Everything the Media Tells You. And so I'll repeat that again in case you need to write it down, but what it's like to believe everything that the media tells you. So if you check that out on YouTube, it's just funny, a little bit of satire, might get your mind thinking about different things that are going on in the world right now. And anyways, that's my shout out to the people that put out things like that. So
awesome. Thanks, Chris. Alan, any shout outs for yourself? Alan, I think you're on mute. I've got one more here. So Rick and Andrew from Maple Seed for their patience and service to the shooting community. This is coming from Ian. The pair are also listeners to both the Canadian Prepper podcast and the Canadian I forget the other one. I'm sorry. So we'll go out to outros. So I'm going to bring episode 81 of the Canadian Prepper podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please help us and submit a review. It helps other people find us. I can also be reached, at hfxprepper@gmail.com or hughes@prepperpodcast.ca. I also have my own YouTube channel. Just search for HFX Prepper. Over to Alan. Alan's not there. We record these shows live on Facebook and YouTube. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast, and click on the notifications tab. That gives you an alert that we're about to go live, and you can contact us directly as well on Instagram at TPSWO. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you there.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I'd love to hear from anybody. If they'd love to give me a call, my number is 250-575-9221. I really enjoy speaking directly with people to find the best solution to fit their needs. If you prefer email, you can reach me at email at gotsolarkelowna@gmail.com. That's gotsolarkelowna@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for joining us, everyone. Until the next time, be prepared, stay safe, and keep learning.